Going on, everyone? This is Raw and Unfiltered with David Elliott, and this is going to be part 4 of a 4-part video series of how to pre-qualify your underwriting in 60 seconds or less. In today's video, we're going to look at an example of what is a pre-qualified lead or not a pre-qualified lead look like in terms of your underwriting. We're going to look at a property of which the numbers do not make sense, and it is a unlikely offer that the seller will accept via creative terms. So let's take a look at this one property as a prime example. If you did not see part 1, 2, or 3, I highly suggest you check that out before you continue on with part 4. So let's pull up the property. And here it is. The two most important values that you want to be looking at is the purchase price and the rent in the area. So let's take a look at the purchase price. It is $469. We're going to round that up to $470. And we're going to look at the rent values in this area. And the rent right now is saying it's about $1,674. So we're going to run that down ever so slightly to $1,600 a month. And we're going to round this one up to $470. So let's plug in these two values into our pre-qualifying calculator. For right now, they are at $470 is the current as price. And we are going to pull up the encumbrance for the property. So let's move this one over to the screen. And you can see here that the total encumbrance on the property is $66,000. It's not a lot. So we're going to plug that in. And it'll be $66,000 and some change. We could probably bump that up to $67,000. So why don't we do that instead? Total encumbrance is $67,000. And we're going to look at the best case scenario, just like in parts 1, 2, and 3, for a conventional offer that a seller can receive. So let's look at that, $470. And let's look at the best case scenario for the sales fee, which you should know by now is 4%. And the capital gains will be at 15% on average. And we can see here that the seller is going to walk away with $384,000 on cash or on a conventional offer such as an FHA buyer, a VA buyer. This is the amount of money that will be received by the seller in a best case scenario. Now, technically, in a scenario such as this, a 3% commission towards the listing agent is very rare, meaning it's very rare to get just 3% listing agent without having a buyer's commission. However, if you go direct to the listing agent, you can cut out the extra commission that the seller will have to pay. Otherwise, they would be looking at about 7% towards a sales fee, maybe even closer to 8%, depending on what closing costs are for that particular state. But on a best case scenario, we're going to be looking at 4% sales fee. And we're going to now look at a creative structure on terms, and we're going to compare and contrast the two. So let's stay at $470 temporarily. Let's give them 10% down at $47,000 would be 10% down. Let's give a best case scenario sales fee of 3.7%. 0.7 would be the average closing cost that you could expect via a creative deal. And if you're going to wholesale this, let's put in a minimum of a $10,000 assignment fee. And because there's such a great amount of seller carryback, they will not be paying capital gains this fiscal year. Those capital gains will be deferred. So in a scenario where the seller has the option to accept a cash or a conventional offer through a retail buyer, they're going to receive $384,000 at closing, whereas on your creative deal, they're going to be expecting to get about $30,000. So if this does not scream out to you right away what the major differences are, it should. A creative offer will, in most cases, be slightly less than what a seller will receive via cash or conventional. In this case, it is such a large difference simply because the encumbrance is really low. Now, you could go above asking price, and we could give them more money. So let's give the benefit of the doubt on the creative, right? Let's go up to $45,000 over ask price. That will cap us out at about a 10%. And if that is the case, we can actually come up on the down payment. We can give them $50,000 down, but now we need to include the rent. Now, I believe the rent was going to be at about $1,700 a month. So let's plug that in, and we could see right now that this is not a deal. The approximate cash on cash is less than 5%. That is not good. That's quite poor. We want to avoid that. We want to be closer to 10%, preferably 12% over. But if you're at the 10% mark, you could probably get away with it, being that under a full underwriting, you can expect your full underwriting to be coming up as 12 to 13% cash on cash, because how these calculations are based off of, they're based off of a worst case scenario. So this is not a deal worth pursuing in the sense that you don't want to be spending time presenting a creative offer to the seller when they could go ahead with cash or conventional. Even at $45,000 over ask price, it's way too much money in terms of the seller carryback and very little money up front. And most sellers want their money up front. They do not want to wait 3, 5, 7 years. So this would be a property example of which I would letter this out and give it an F. Now, the only time that I would revisit this property is if the days on market climbed to, let's say, 120 days. If this was sitting on market for 120 days, now the seller could kind of have a different level of conversation and may actually be open to creative simply because the days on market has climbed to an extreme level. But based off of these numbers here, this is one of those properties that I would avoid. I would move on because there are other leads that you could pre-qualify and you would know that the numbers would work. So this one here is going to get a letter grade of an S. You want to stick with your A properties and with your B properties. Those are going to be primarily the properties that you want to call up immediately. You don't even need to wait for days on market to climb. You can simply call them up and express interest onto the property and present them a creative solution that a conventional offer may or may not be the right answer for the seller, and a creative solution may actually end up netting more money to the seller at closing or give them a benefit towards the back end where they are receiving the additional proceeds after close through monthly installments. So I would definitely focus on A and B properties. Your C properties, those you could follow up on, but wait until the purchase price drops. When the purchase price drops, it'll most likely turn into a Class B underwriting, and you can then have a proper conversation with the agent and with the seller. And as for this property that we just reviewed, this is not a deal worth pursuing, at least not at this moment in time. The only way that this would be a property worth pursuing via creative is if you actually saw in the description that they were open to creative or that they were a motivated seller. Otherwise, I would avoid this particular property specifications completely and not waste time with a full underwriting, knowing that you can calculate everything that you need in 60 seconds or less, and you can move on to a better deal.